Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Key to Games podcast here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. We have another great show lined up, and joining me, my co-host from Casual Game Studio, Joshua Reyes. How are you doing? We are finally entering spring around here, at least.
Yeah, that's right. It's still been like, well, it was like 20 degrees and now it's 40 degrees, so getting a bit of fluctuation. I'm doing all right. The week's been busy. I don't know if I said it on the last podcast, but the game I'm currently working on, Samurai Pig, lost about 2 months of work due to a contractor, which is actually going to set us back like 4 to 6 months or more. So that's something I've been dealing with. And of course, been a little sick. So there's that. And then having I swear I have like a roller coaster tycoon around the house, and so I'm having the Ohio train derailment PTSD. Other than that, though, I'm doing good. There's been some really nice AI tools that are released that I've been messing with this week, so that's pretty neat. How are you doing, Josh? We're gonna work on your book.
Yep, work is still going on. I finally finished reviewing it last night. It's now at 72,000 words. Every time I review it, I add another 1,000 words to it. So I need to stop looking at it now and start image sourcing. Got the first mock-ups of the cover art, which people seem to want things to be like a little bit more, I think, toned, a little bit more, I guess, like, I don't want to say realistic, but maybe more like the older, like, fantasy RPG covers.
Right.
So I'm going to see what the illustrator thinks on that one. And for anyone who's on the Discord, I posted that there, so let me know what you think on that one.
Excellent.
Let's see. Other than that, playing more games, writing, got more videos. Again, the usual spiel there. But
was there another fest that happened?
No, not yet, but I'm sure there'll be one soon.
I feel like there's one every week now.
Mm-hmm. But with Josh not feeling so well last week, we did miss our topic, but we're going to catch up with it this week. And that is on the RPG genre, something that I have had no thoughts about in the last 3 months at all.
Yeah.
It's the first time I'm talking about it here. But one of the major discussions that was happening last week that seems to like happen as one of those seasonal things is the idea of trying to, I guess, put a finger on what is an RPG. Because RPG design, as I figured out as I was writing the book and it kept going and going and going, is that it is a major pain to try and put a accurate label on. It is a genre that I think in this one we could arguably say has had like the largest reach or influence on like the rest of the game industry.
Definitely.
And with that reach has come just so many different takes on it. And like we did our first influential games we did was on the platformer genre. And platformers and platforming itself, it's a very like I guess institutionalized genre. It's something that what a platformer is when you see it. It's very easy to say that, okay, this is a good platformer. This platformer doesn't handle well, it's a bad platformer. An RPG is become a very nebulous term, as Arva is saying in chat, because guess what? Just about every video game these days has featured RPG design or RPG mechanics in some way, shape, or form.
Literally, life is now an RPG, right? I mean...
My life is a Dark Souls.
Yeah, I'm in Dark Souls and G++ also.
Yeah. And it didn't used to be that way, and we'll be probably spending a good 40 minutes to an hour on that statement later on. But, like, to start kind of this discussion off, the genre has come a ridiculous long way from where it originated back in the, we could argue, late 70s or mid to late 70s with tabletop RPGs, the Dungeons and Dragons, and then kind of the very first CRPGs, JRPGs. Ultima is kind of considered the one that really kind of set that foundation of what a CRPG was, and then we had Dragon Quest / Dragon Warrior, and then that was, of course, followed up by Final Fantasy, that solidified things from the JRPG side. So, I guess here's a question for you and for the folks watching us. CRPG versus JRPG, which one do you prefer to play?
Both. You know, I love all art. For me, I mean, and that's the thing, right? Like that's what we're going to be discussing about, like how RPGs is one of those genres, like how you're talking about platformers is almost like static or in stasis, and you can say like this is what it is, right? And with an RPG, it can be so nebulous, like it can have one tendril of one thing and one tendril of something else, and it makes it so hard to categorize what it is. But actually, just both of them, I'm fine with both. Any one of them. I love RPGs, so any one of them is fine with me. What about you, Josh? You have a preference?
I think for me, I prefer JRPGs. Or at least
JRPGs.
the ones that are more mechanic driven. So the Shin Megami Tensei's, The World Ends With You, dungeon crawlers, wizardry, that kind of thing. I think part of it was that I did not grow up with any of the CRPGs. I did not play
I
Ultima.
didn't. Yeah, same here. So you know what? If I'm now that I'm thinking about it, really the JRPG is what I've put in all my hours in, because let's see, if we're gonna talk about, it's like Dungeons and Dragons, Ultima. There was Wizardry. Dragon Quest was a little bit different, but like those ones, yeah, I didn't grow up with them, and they weren't in my vernacular at all, or like so. When games were based on that, didn't really interest me, and so yeah, those topics, you know, I didn't really jive with those games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think for me, like, as we were talking about this the other night when I was playing Limbus Company and Woken, that I really gravitate towards, like, very, like, system-heavy titles, where, you know, it's kind of like this puzzle box that you're trying to solve of how do I use these mechanics to win the game. Whereas a lot of CRPGs kind of evolved into the, I guess, like, the slice of life, or kind of you're existing in the world. Like, it's not so much about
Right.
you, like, I guess trying to, like, master the game. It's more about, okay, you are a elven warrior, or you are a wizard, and you're, you know, living in this space, you're going around. And these games suddenly evolve into being very, I guess, driven by that kind of exploration. Whereas for me, I prefer kind of like, again, let's have an interesting battle. Let's design an enemy that breaks the rules. It's probably why, again, that I love Library of Ruina so much, is that entire game was just basically, here's a deck building RPG, and now we're going to introduce everything that has nothing to do with it, or just breaks that kind of tradition, and challenge you that way.
Right. Yeah. Since you're working on the book, I wanted to ask you, you know, like, do the basic mechanics of like RPG, like the heavy ones, you know, stat management, inventory, skills, gyms, just with like everything's upgradable. Does the mechanics still work, or do they push gamers away? Like, you know,
Yeah.
is that kind of like the demise of live service games, because everything's so
Mm.
watered down RPG? That might be too large of a question, but
Yeah, it was one of those things that, as I was doing, like, the first time that I knew that there was a
yeah.
problem with writing the book was when I got to the subgenres, where something wasn't just a JRPG and a CRPG. Now we have strategy RPGs. Now we have tactical strategy games. Then we have, you know, just every genre adopting RPG mechanics and systems. And one of the things I think I kind of concluded is that if you make a 100%, you know, stock JRPG or CRPG today, it's not going to do well. Like, the
Yeah.
audience has really moved away, at least when we talk about mainstream. Again, there are people who will love every game from Jeff Vogue. There are the people who will play, you know, every RPG Maker style
Like,
game.
there's the new Baldur's Gate, right, coming out, and
Baldur's
I'm
Gate
wondering, like,
3.
right, like, I'm wondering how is that going to do now, like, in this current environment? Like, do people like is it, like do people still have time for that type of design?
And that was another thing that I said, that we've really moved away from quantity being the marketing point for a game
Right.
these days. Again, 50, or I'm sorry, like 30 years ago, you say we have a 100-hour long RPG, it's like, oh my god, you know, that's going to be my next 3-4 month game.
Right.
You try marketing your game with that today. Here, we have a
Running
200.
away from that.
Yeah, and it is a very like strange concept. And I think this is one of the things I mentioned in my book because one of the complaints I got in one of my older books was that I didn't list every single platform, every single roguelike. Well, I kind of preempted that in this book and said that it does not matter anymore knowing
Yeah.
every single RPG that came
No.
out because
No.
guess what? You try to make again Final Fantasy 1 or even Final Fantasy 6 today, most people aren't going to care about that.
Yeah.
And it really has shown that evolution. Go ahead.
I used to think earlier in my gaming career and gaming development career that every game needed to be experienced and you had to play every game to experience it, but it's not like that anymore.
No.
Not at all, is it, Josh?
No, and again, like to actually give someone an accurate list of every single RPG that's been
That would
released,
be
that's
yeah,
impossible. I
that's
mean,
impossible.
I dedicate a section of the book to RPG Maker and how that has really opened up the floodgates for a lot of developers to make RPG style games without needing to know programming. And again, you can argue that okay, an RPG Maker game is not going to be as big of a seller as Elden Ring. But again, who cares? These are games that have like their own unique audience, their own unique designs. And what you said like a few minutes ago about trying to put a pulse on okay, do gamers still want a very stat heavy game? Do they still want crafting or whatever? It really again it's so nebulous because so many of the subgenres, and I said this in the book, have evolved by just saying, you know what? I want to play an RPG, but I don't care about turn-based combat. We got action RPGs. Or someone else said, I don't want to play, about crafting. Why don't we do, I don't know, cooking? Why don't we do racing? Why don't we do horror RPGs? And a lot of these subgenres and these kinds of offshoots or off branches evolve just by saying, I don't like this part of an RPG. I want to focus on
Right.
this.
Right, like extracting like maybe the one thing that they didn't like about an RPG. Like I don't like the turn-based mechanics of it, so let's change that to action. And I think that's how it evolved into what it is, right? Like literally like the NBA, whatever NBA, I'm not sure what the new basketball games are, but they're like 100% RPGs almost, literally like sports games or RPGs. Call of Duty, I mean, it's what you couldn't argue that it's all an RPG, right? So
Yeah, and I made that joke on Twitter last night. We were talking about like how genres are just like taking stabs at other ones. Like, why don't we call all sports games American RPGs now? And we'll shorten that to ARPG because no one's using that one.
oh boy, yeah, that's that's a good one.
And to Todd's comment, that's another big aspect, and that's another huge part of the book was talking about abstracted based design. That the beauty about RPGs, and that has been kind of one of the things like the traditional fans hold on to, is that you don't need reflexes.
Yes.
You don't need APM to play a older Final Fantasy, but
and if you were bad, you could grind your way to like just demolish the boss, right? I mean, a very approachable.
yeah. And I think it's that approachability is why we saw so many RPG systems be adopted by other games.
Right.
Again, if you look at the action genre 20 years ago, what games did we have? We had Devil May Cry, Ninja Gaiden, God Hand, Bayonetta. These are games where you can't grind. There is no leveling that's going to stop you from getting pounded into the ground if you don't know how to do offensive attacks. You don't know how to do defense.
Good. That's it.
And now we look at games today. Look at how many action games have a gear rating system. How many games have borrowed the Dark Souls style of, soul level, equipment level. And it really has changed. And again, it's why I said at the start that RPG design, we could really, I think, make a case that it is the most far-reaching genre of any other genre in the game industry.
Yeah, like I don't know when we've analyzed some genres. I think when we were talking about like car combat, and we were like how static that genre
It
is,
kind
and
of
I
just
think
hit that wall and just never.
never going past that. And this one is just growing to like absorb every single genre and changing and it has the ability to morph, and like if it was water it can go into any shape,
Mhm.
so there's just something about it. And I think it's one of the only genres that really is doing that. If I think about, if I think what genres are advancing or making
Mhm.
advancement, I'd say it's the only one.
I mean, I do wonder how much of that is kind of like cross pollinating with the roguelike genre, and how much roguelikes have really had like that huge resurgence
Right.
over the past decade. And again,
Yeah.
like traditional roguelike fans kind of hate that because now everyone thinks a roguelike is a Binding of Isaac or a Dead Cells when they're still making those traditional ones. And
Yeah.
I think it goes back to that original question, or the one we were saying a few minutes ago, like, do traditional examples of the genre sell? And when I say sell, like I'm talking like the same numbers as, what people want, like a big name release. Because if you look at something like BioWare, like imagine like again telling someone 20 years ago that BioWare would be doing horribly in 20 years from now. Imagine telling them just all the horrible things that was going to come out from Blizzard 20 years
Right.
ago. And
Right.
like a big part of the I mentioned this in the book that like when we look at kind of the two companies that became the signifiers of CRPG and JRPG respectively, it would be BioWare and Squaresoft. And both
Yep.
companies have really like gone in very different directions. I know a lot of people have, said doom and gloom about Square Enix now for a while. And, a lot of people are also wondering the same thing about not Baldur's Gate, about BioWare.
Yeah, BioWare for sure. Square, they have Final Fantasy 14 luckily in their pocket, and I think that's just funding the entire studio
Hmm.
because they got really lucky with that one. Great directors, and then they revised it. And I always said that Final Fantasy 14 is a really good case study of like a game design and refining and polishing. But yeah, I think that's the only thing like propping up Square Enix. I literally saw an ad, or not the ad, but that it was an advertisement for Final Fantasy 16, and it said 35 hours to complete, 80 hours to complete everything, and I was like, I don't think. Could you maybe cut that in half or less?
Hmm.
It just doesn't sell. Like again, like back in the day we would get the box and we look in the box and it'd be like 120 hours, my summer's set. And right, not anymore. Now it's
Hmm.
like every single game is like that. So and I think another, like, maybe the bigger question is like, should we even use RPG, or has like all the mechanics of RPGs are just simply now normal game mechanics, right? And I mean,
It is a very tough one. To Oliver's comment, when you like that dramatic piano music after the BioWare didn't die section. And yeah, like this has been like one of the major things about how RPG design has grown is that it has become delineated out, or it has really like taken a lot of what people consider to be an RPG and put it everywhere. Like the only genre that I think hasn't really become susceptible to this would probably be platformers. Like,
yeah.
but I mean, I think like Super Paper Mario RPG. No, Super Paper Mario was like a platformer, but also had like RPG style combat and leveling up. So I mean, even that isn't like completely safe from it. But I would argue, and this is something I was like talking about on Twitter and the
Did you play
book.
that one, Josh? That one was actually pretty good.
Yeah, one time. I would
It was
love
like
to go back.
it was like baby's first RPG. It was
Mhm.
really nice.
But I was talking about this that there has to be like there. I think there is a legitimate difference between, say, a game that is an RPG versus a game that kind of uses it as like a thematic or as a thematic genre. Kind of like when we talk about the difference between a game that's trying to be scary and a game that's actually like a horror game, or this is the horror racing game versus like a racing horror game. And I would say that, and I think Craig Stern from Sinister Design, like he made a post about, as I included a link to in the book. I think he said this really well, that an RPG should be a game where the player has to make interesting and affecting choices for how their character progresses. Because if you, as we said earlier, like one of the things that a lot of developers have copied is kind of like the guise of an RPG. If you look at, Call of Duty, all the Far Cries, all the open world games, like to them, decision making is just basically like a linear tree. It's like, here's +5 damage, +3 movement speed. This is your ability to do a stealth attack. This is your, I don't know, free heal. There's no choices being made. It's just a linear tree up, or, even if there's like, 3 separate trees, it's not changing. It's not really changing how you're playing the game. If I'm playing a first-person shooter, I'm still shooting regardless of if I'm using a +5 shotgun or a +2 sniper rifle.
Right, what changed? And I mean, like, it's role-playing games, so you're playing a role, right? So that the idea is that you like, you're gonna assume like a character and like be in a fictional world, and then the narrative and choices that you do will influence and change things, right? And like you're saying, people are taking, I think, just the mechanics and extracting them and saying this is an RPG, when a true RPG is much more like stats and abilities and things like that. They were there and established, but it's not the key aspect of it. It revolves a hero or your party or whatever. But like you were saying, the choices that the player make affect the story, and it shapes the game's world. And me having a +5 weapon doesn't affect Call of Duty, right? It doesn't affect Call of Duty or anything in any way. And they kind of boiled it down to that in a way, don't you think?
Yeah. And like the problem, like with saying it's just about having a role, and it was something that Craig said, I also mentioned in the book, is that if we wanted to stretch that term, literally every video game ever made is about you inhabiting a role. You're inhabiting the role of Mario. You're inhabiting the role of the Doomslayer, or Rayman, or whoever you want to be. But yet, there has to be consequences to your choices. And when we say the term consequence here, we don't just mean it's a bad thing. We mean that if I want to build, I don't know, a trap-based archer, well, that's how I'm going to play this game. If I want to build a earth mage, that's how I want to play that game. But the two are not just like a matter of, hey, I swapped out my staff for a bow, I'm magically an archer now. Or, vice versa. There has to be, you have to kind of go with how that character or how you want that party to progress. Every game is a puzzle game. No? Yeah.
Indeed.
And like you said, a lot of developers and a lot of studios have really taken like the basic mechanics of an RPG, but it doesn't make that game an RPG. Just like, again, that if I want to put a spooky monster in my game, that doesn't automatically make it a horror game or a survival horror. Because, Doom Eternal, that's a horror game, right? You're supposed to be very scared of everything in that one.
For sure. Definitely. Yeah, and I like your RPG mechanics have like had a massive influence, I think, of more genres than any other genre, right? Because you can find them in literally everything from platformers to racing games to everything. But simply putting those mechanics an RPG it does not make, right? And I think that when we're talking RPGs, this should be like the original true definition. And when we're having like something like Call of Duty, I think you can just I don't even think you could say it has RPG like mechanics. You can just say, nah, I don't know, it has an upgrade system or something like that. But even saying it has an RPG, I think is a disservice to RPG and watering it down.
Mm-hmm. And you need to be able to have that distinction. Because a lot, again, of what we've said is that just saying that your game has stats, just saying that you can wear +5 helmet or have a +7 belt, that doesn't make it an RPG. And,
Right.
like, as we've said, like, so many of the action games have tried to, like, call themselves RPGs, it doesn't really work. As I've said, like, I was not a huge fan of God of War 2018. I haven't played the other one, because it just felt like they were watering down not only the action side of things, but
The
the
RPG.
RPG.
Right. It was like the original God of War was like just action game, right? And
Mhm.
so and you're playing this one and like you're saying, both were watered down. The RPG mechanics didn't really work. It seemed like they were just forced in trying to put them in there. And then that brought down kind of, combat still God of War, but I agree with you there. I agree with you there how I felt. I didn't play the second one. I wonder how that one went in
Mhm.
the direction.
And I guess I think this is a good segue into another question. Why did so many games want to copy these elements? And this was something
Right,
that
right.
I have a video that I still need to edit, and it's something that I mentioned in the book. But there's a one of the biggest, I think, trends that I think a lot of people understood from the last decade was the rise of mobile and live service games. This idea that we can extend a game out using the RPG progression scale. Again,
Right.
you start level 1, now you're 10, 50, 100, or even just again with a gear rating system. And there is huge money in that. Again, as we've
I
said.
think, yeah, I think you answered the question. I think that's literally what it was. They found realized that that's one of the easiest ways, or one of the ways to pad out a game. Just like all arcade games were designed around difficulty to get you put in more quarters. Well, maybe they figure okay, well, with RPGs we can put you need these stats, you need to purchase this, and especially with microtransactions, I think microtransactions even helped raise that more, right? Because
Mhm.
all those elements are there, and now we can like. So I think that helped the rise of it. But
Mhm.
Jim, I think that is one of the answers. It's really strange why it permeated so far. And to me, the only answer I can think about is padding and some of the psychological factors. Of course, there's psychological factors in the RPG, and I think eventually some of the companies hired some psychological people, the psychologists, and they were like, "Oh yeah, that people really love when you level up, and they love when your gear degrades and you have to repair it. It's their favorite thing." And so they decided to start adding that in every game. What reasons do you think that they started adding them to every game? Was for padding or for
I think it's more for. I think, as we said, there's 2 points about this. I think one is for the approachability aspect. The idea
approachability,
that we
right?
kind of move away from reflex driven gameplay being the predominant factor, and again, allowing someone to level up their axe or, invest
Right.
more in health, as we saw in Dark Souls. But I think the other aspect of this, again, is trying to pad out these games, trying to make them feel larger than what they are in theory. It's no longer about, oh, we're just going to let you play a 8 to 10 hour long action game. No, now we can expand that out into 18 to 30 hours of you having to go around and do various side quests, puzzles, and we want you to upgrade your gear. Because I'm just imagining like what God of War 2018 would have been like if there was no gear rating system whatsoever. And I'm sure it would have been a far different experience, or at least one that isn't so RP or trying to have that RPG aspect to it.
It would have felt more Rip and Teary
Mm-hmm.
than the RPG, and it really like slowed it down for that type of game.
Mm-hmm.
I remember like having to stop when it doesn't really fit the flow. Like you slam the RPG in there, so I'm there just murdering zombies, or I can't remember the enemies. There's all kind of enemies. God of War,
Mm-hmm.
excuse me, and then you have to stop and like have this like kind of okay skill tree and upgrade this or that, and it's kind of like a break and flow, and it doesn't fit, and you can tell it doesn't fit. You can tell that someone was just like, we need to have RPG elements in here because every game requires it now and players demand this, and I think that's what happened there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not every game needs RPG elements, and I think, and I'm pushing to for this, that games should be shorter. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and you can totally make a short RPG. I'm Josh. You play every there. I'm sure you found some short and sweet
Mm-hmm.
RPG that was just a few hours, right? And it was a great experience, and you didn't have to grind and waste your time. Your time was respected, and a lot of the elements of RPGs, the mechanics that are extracted, are not really time respecters. They're more like monetization creators, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And you have to, again, like, there's that meme of, I want shorter games with worse graphics, and,
Yeah.
and not every game needs these systems. And again, when we see developers who are trying to kind of copy the RPG mechanics, it's not often for the better. Like,
No.
again, like, there's a difference between, like, we go with God of War 2018. There would have been a difference between having a flat, gear rating system versus, let's say you have different axes. Let's say you have one that gives you more rage generation or more. I completely forget all the resources in that game. But if you give the player different choices, and this is the difference between a game that just uses RPG mechanics, and again, something like an ARPG or one of the other style ones, when there's a fundamental difference between, hey, I want to build my character as dual wielding life steal versus I want to be a super slow, heavy stagger guy. Like, there's a legitimate difference in that playstyle. In God of War, and we can even argue to the extent like stuff like Tom Clancy's The Division games,
Yeah.
it's not a choice. It's basically, hey, this is a +7 axe. You like this +3 axe, this axe is gone. You can't use this anymore. Because if you try to use a lower rated weapon, the game punishes you for it.
Right.
Less than 1,000 hours non-RPG.
Yeah. Indeed.
And part of, again, like, why we've seen this kind of growth and explosion, we could really trace this, again, to the mobile and live service space. There are lots and lots of mobile games that have used RPG mechanics. Again, I think it's at this point, it's literally A to Z in terms of mobile games that have made use of this. And a lot that I talked about in my book on free-to-play games, that if you look at kind of the mobile genre in 2010 versus 2020, it's night and day. In the first, 3 years of 2010, like 2010 to 2013, 2014, what were the hot mobile games? Candy Crush, Farmville, Jetpack Joyride, what was it? Fruit Ninja, very basic games where the monetization kind of, the monetization is not really tied to the gameplay. It's more tied to kind of like the service of the game.
Yeah, the days of innocence.
Yeah. And now we fast forward to today and we look at some like the top names in the mobile space these days. You have, again, like the deck builders, Marvel Snap that's doing incredibly well. You have stuff like Azur Lane, Genshin Impact, Punishing Gray Raven, Arc Knights. These are games where the monetization supplements kind of like the more challenging gameplay. You're, rolling for that really great 6-star character or that really fantastic SSR that's going to give you all these new options. And to go back to the question we were saying earlier about why this has kind of delineated out so much or spread so much, is that it is very addictive. I mean,
Right.
remember Cow Clicker? Cow Clicker was designed to be a way to show how horrible it is or how addictive, watching numbers go up, and it got people addicted watching numbers
Yes.
go up.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's very strange. I mean, and I love it. Like MMOs. I play Final Fantasy 14 and FF11, and just seeing the number go up, whatever it is, your blade level went up, gives me dopamine, right? And so it's just strange that simple mechanic is something that we enjoy so much.
Mm-hmm. And it is incredibly effective to drive engagement.
Right.
In only 5 more levels will give you a new skill. And again, that's
Right.
another big thing of so many mobile RPGs, that it's not even a choice anymore. Characters level up on their own, the skills are unlocked at fixed points. You're not building a character, you're just, again, collecting numbers to let other numbers fight each other.
Right. So, since you're working on the book, what do you think some of the key trends like that are going on, from, I don't know, from like the BioWare days to now? Like, what do you think key trends that are going on that have changed?
Well, I think, like I said, we've moved away from the days of very quantitative experiences driving people to play. But I think we could also argue that a lot of the newer fans, they grew up with smartphones. They didn't play Dungeons & Dragons. They didn't play Baldur's Gate or pick any major RPG. They grew up playing all these mobile-style games. And a lot of the mobile games are meant to be very quick engagements. They're meant to be very easy to get into. And I think that if we look at kind of like traditional CRPGs and JRPGs, they're kind of, I think, going to have that reckoning that the adventure genre had. That if you think that, again, Baldur's Gate is going to attract new people to the RPG genre, I don't think it's going to do that. It's going to do well. Again, there is a healthy market for classic CRPGs, just as there's people who still support adventure games. But it's no longer like that big ticket genre, at least in the traditional sense. And it's
do they even pull in, do CRPGs even pull in a new audiences? You know what I mean? I feel like it's just older people that grew up with it playing it.
And that, I think, is a very important point to clarify or to expand on, because I know someone's going to say, how dare you insult Baldur's Gate? It's one of the most beloved franchises. And that's the point. That you cannot compare Baldur's Gate, Final Fantasy, and Mass Effect to insert an indie version of Baldur's Gate or an indie version of Final Fantasy. Because again, name recognition, brand recognition are such key aspects that a lot of people, again, don't give that enough credit.
Literally, okay, so if we literally took the Baldur's Gate remake, took it exactly, and just took away the IP and released it, it would probably do horribly, and no one would play it. And the only reason that people are even looking at it is just due to the IP, like you said, right?
Yeah. And it's why, again, I think so many first-time developers fall into that trap of,
right,
I just want to make Final Fantasy 1. Final Fantasy 1 was an amazing JRPG. Where are we at? Over 30 years ago. And I said this at the start, that if you just think playing every single RPG or just playing the best RPGs of 10, 15, 20 years ago is going to help you these days, it's not, because the genre has changed in so many ways. And a lot of that has been people who are playing games that we don't consider to be RPGs. Just like how people over the last decade, they don't know what NetHack is. They've never heard of what was the other one? There's a one like a stone soup. I forget the name of it. They don't know what that is. They know what the Binding of Isaac is. They know Dead Cells and Returnal. And it is that very tough thing, I think, for a lot of people to understand, is that you cannot just make a traditional RPG. Like, it will sell. Again, Jeff Vogue has been doing this now for over 30 years. But he also understands that he's not going to invest Call of Duty money, levels of money, into one of his games. Because he knows he's never going to get that amount back. And it is that tough decision to make as to how much do you want to push into this. And like as we've said, like a big point about how the RPG genre has grown and exploded is people just saying, I like this, I hate this, so let me focus on this side of the RPG, and what do we come up with? And the answer to that is we come with a lot of games. There's musical RPGs. Again, as we said, the whole driving aspect. People who now play games where you can customize your cars, and you can get different levels of engines, and so on. It is very addictive. And like Todd said in chat, stats are cheap. It's about just changing numbers. You don't need new art. You can have that the PNG of that knight, but now instead of being level 99, they're level 299, and they do 800,000 points of damage, which is far higher than 30,000. So it's growing. It gives you that dopamine rush.
Yeah. For some reason, grinding and watching the numbers grow is addicting. I used to be way more into it when I was younger. I had more time, but not now as much. But that's true, and that's like a key pitfall of like new game designers. I see so many first time ones, and they're making like a Zelda like Zelda 1 or and it's like that no one wants to really play that. Like you would have to do so much different, and they're I don't know, they have the most compelling story ever and the most unique art ever to kind of pull people in. But and I see people doing that, or what are some other game genres that people usually do in RPGs? But just basically like Zelda likes as their first one, and again, it doesn't work as a selling point because no one really wants to play that. Like if I did, I would play the original Zelda. I can play it on my Switch or my the 3DS shop is down now, so maybe not.
Yeah, and again, it's that question of we have an audience, we have a market of people who they do not care about what Mass Effect is. If you want, again, I said this in the play at the end, that in 10 years from now, Elden Ring will be considered that old man's RPG. And Dark Souls will be just that relic that, a bunch of old guys on forums talk about how good it is.
Right. It's like it is at the point. It's like if someone says you have to play Mass Effect, it's like, why? Why would I have to play Mass Effect? To experience what? I mean, there's a game, so it's like you're not forced to. It's not the same how it was before. Like you said, there's so few released year in a year that would be the focus. Now there's so many that there's no reason to even invest that much time into it. So you have to do something else as your selling point. It's like RPG, or literally, putting RPG mechanics kind of scares me away. I'm like, oh, stats, inventory, you know what I mean? Like you have to have a lot more than the RPG mechanics to sell me on it, because just those things alone, I think, are trappings in a kind of way for developers.
I mean, we could see this again with how many developers have been trying to copy the live service formula. And this is something that we
Oh
talked
my
about, I think, like
gosh.
3-4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
That just saying we're going to add one new level to this game every 3 months, or hey, you can now grind gear for the Incredible Hulk, it doesn't really work. And one of the big things about some of the more successful games, it's about adding in new content, and once again, it adds choice. And one of the biggest trends that we saw from the mobile space over the last like 5 to 7 years have been more party or team style gotchas and hero collectors, where it's not just about, oh, we're just going to release one character and this character is the best character in the game. It's, we want you to build these different teams because teams give more characters. It means there's more to collect. And more to collect means more people will spend money. They'll become engaged with it. But again, that question is just, what are you actually getting?
Mm-hmm.
Are you getting anything of value out of it? Or are you just, again, going to get like the trappings of an RPG? I mentioned that game Memento Mori, that I tried it. Again, really great production values, but there's just no gameplay. It is just numbers fighting numbers. And
Right.
whoever has the higher number, there's no strategy, there's no decision making. It's basically this one character has higher stats than everyone else. Your entire team composition that you spent, I don't know, days, weeks, whatever, trying to build, they're just slapped down in one hit.
I feel like you've like explained every single mobile app.
Yeah. And again, it's why the games that are trying to do more are really trying to push more depth to their systems. It's why stuff like Genshin Impact, a lot of people are getting really excited about, I think it's Honkai Star Rail. That is the next one that's out April 28th. I think I was just watching a video on it. That, like, MiHoYo really gets the idea of there has to be a weight to, getting these characters. There has to be a reason to get them other than just shiny new thing or, this character now does 8,000 damage. Because if you remember, again, I still remember that era when the Battlefield free-to-play came out, and developers made that lovely post saying, after we started selling weapons for money, our profits went up for some reason. I wonder why.
Right.
And I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier, that so many mobile, and we could argue so many double and triple A developers really started to listen to the casino gambling industry. Again, Ramin probably has more stories than any of us could count of, getting gambling advisors and people who specialize in casinos going to Zynga or King. And that's where those games were selling. But the thing is, that sells to the casual market. Again, a core player, someone who plays Call of Duty or Final Fantasy, they're not playing Candy Crush Saga. They're not playing Farmville or any of those games. But if you create, Call of Duty, and you attach, weapon modifiers, and we now have loot boxes. Again, the whole push of loot boxes and surprise mechanics is another big point about this.
Yeah.
Now you can say, oh, well, you have your depth, but now we're going to give you, purple rated guns and, epic skins, and we're going to keep you entertained for, months and months on end, until the next Call of Duty comes out, and then the old one, gets sent away on the, like a Viking funeral. It gets sent out to sea. And then the cycle repeats again.
Yeah. In that regard, do you think that RPG trappings in every game is kind of a downfall?
I think it has. I think for like the traditional genres, I think it is a downfall of them because again, people who grew up playing a game like Arknights or playing Call of Duty or God of War, even Elden Ring, do they want to go back to a time where you have to build a character entirely from scratch, managing every single stat before you even see what the game looks like?
Yeah. And you know what? I think there's been a few times the game, but I get there and then I look at stats that I have to choose, and I literally something happened.
Yeah, your voice kind of like cut out as you were saying.
Okay, I'm not sure like how many games that I've played, and like those CRPGs, and you're having to choose all these options about your. I don't think I have time for that. If the character customization is this intricate, right? Like, what else? How's everything else in the game is going to be, right? So,
yeah.
It's just stunning.
You have all those quest markers, and tells you exactly where to go. And yeah, like again, like there's so many like mobile like MMO style RPGs where it's just okay, click this button, your character will run straight to the quest marker, do all the fighting for you. Hey, you get gear. Now click this button, and they'll run over there and do all this for you.
Like like an idle RPG? What are you even playing?
And I mean, I have played idle games that have more gameplay than some of these RPGs. And I think that's a really good quick tangent for another point, because I'm sure, if this video gets out to a lot of mobile fans, they will argue with us to that there is depth at games like Princess Connect, or pick any mobile RPG or RPG-style game. But again, it's not about creating choices. It's about numbers. How do I get my number to be higher than the enemy's? And then the game just plays itself. And you can argue that, maybe if you're super min-max, exact button pressing on skills, that's going to matter. But in the long run, if I'm up against a party that has, literally the best characters for this style, all my team composition, all the gear that I farmed, all the stats I raise, it doesn't mean anything, because at the end of the day, 3,000 is less than 10,000 power.
Right, indeed.
Skyrim? Yeah, I mean, like, Skyrim, again, falls in the line with what we kind of saw, I guess, like, the first big expansion away from traditional CRPGs. It's this idea that you're inhabiting a world.
The Western RPGs, right? Is what we were calling them at the time.
Yeah. That it's not... And I think that's one of the reasons why I didn't gravitate towards a lot of those games. That it oftentimes feels like the moment-to-moment side of them is very lacking. That you're not really caring about fighting an enemy or, running to a town. It's more about, I want to follow, the 7 quest chain story and figure out who killed this guy. And again, like, when a lot of people talk about some of the best stuff in Skyrim, they talk about the storytelling. They talk about the quests. I've heard nothing but praise about stuff like the Brotherhood of whatever quests in, like, Oblivion. And depth, oh my goodness, that's a sentence I could ramble on for, like, an hour on easily. Depth does not equal complexity. Because at the end of the day, for a lot of these games, they're oftentimes very simple to play. You can tell me that there's 37 stats onto a character, but if, let's say, only 2 stats affect damage and defense, who cares about the other 30 stats?
Right. Yeah, right. Every time I look up the luck stat, I'm like, does luck even matter?
That's a philosophical question right there as well.
That's right. Well, we said we were going to talk about Nihil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is definitely up there in terms of a philosophical nature there. And again, I think to Arva's point, that's another reason why a lot of mobile games have done really well, is they just basically, what? We don't have depth. Here's attack stat. Higher attack means more damage. Here's life stat. More health means it takes longer to die. Go. That's it. That's all you need to know. And, like, going back to Memento Mori for a second, like, the UI of that game is really well done. Again, when you don't have to actually show combat or there's no decision making, you can make your UI very easy and very snappy to get into. But how many RPGs have we played where it's just this confusing mess
mess.
Okay, this sword does 30 fire and 27 burning. This sword does 30 burning, 27 fire. Which one is better for you?
Right. I mean, like, what is the amount of actually truly care? Like when you were playing Elden Ring, like, was that even too much? Like the stats in Elden Ring, like, would you have preferred to be like simpler and, you know,
I
or
think
is the
to
go
an
ahead.
extent, yeah. Because I think one of the problems that the Elden Ring had was that it just felt like very punishing to experiment in that game. Like, once you've
Right.
decided I'm going to be melee or I'm going to be range, it's like, oh, I found this new shiny weapon, but my stats aren't high enough. I don't have enough materials to rank that weapon up. My weight limit may be affected if I try some new gear.
Yeah.
Like, it just felt, and I think this is one of the issues I had with like Vulcan over a lot of ARPGs that go too much into loot generation. It's like, hey, I found a new axe, but this axe has like none of the passive modifiers. I'm going to still use this axe I have 7 hours ago.
Right.
Like, there's no real decision making. And I think we kind of began or really saw this with Diablo 3 when they kind of really smoothed out all the complexity of their numbers and just saying, okay, you have, I think it's like offense, defense, life. Those are
There
the
you go.
only three
There you
stats,
go.
and nothing else really does anything. Like, it still hurts me that, your weapons can do ice damage, but ice doesn't do anything. Like, there's no difference between ice, fire, lightning. They're just names.
That's right. And I always go back to that one example of how I'm going to say, hey, let's play a game, you and me. The easiest game to play with would be the one with like one or two rules, not the one with 20. The one with 20 rules, we're going to have a lot of trouble playing, right? So when you simplify things, so that's what I'm wondering. Like, do you prefer like how Bloodborne had like only three weapons, right? And or four, yeah, four weapons, or well, not including the DLC, but just a few weapons that you choose from, compared to one that just has a massive amount of weapon choices, and then you're dealing with all this inventory and gyms and stuff like that. Would you prefer the do you think just it being simpler is the way to go now?
I prefer, again, more meaningful choices rather than having just a lot of choices that don't really
Just
matter.
yeah,
Like, I prefer
meaningless
depth
choices.
over breadth. And I think that's one of the reasons why I like Bloodborne more than Elden Ring. Is that in
Yeah.
Bloodborne, I think there's I think at least 10. Again, I forget how much was added in the DLC.
Well, you start with four, right? You start with you at the beginning.
Cain, the axe,
Max,
and like
the gun. Oh no.
there's a third one, but I do not remember. All I remember is Sword Cane. That's the only one
Sword
that,
cane, yeah, yeah.
or Sword
Sword,
Whip.
sword cane, axe.
Yeah.
Yeah, the axe, right? Okay. Anyway, but yeah, you just start with a few.
Mhm. And those choices are fundamentally different. I think again it goes back to what Craig was saying, or from that quote I mentioned, that there has to be an actual choice. If it's going from do you want to use sword, sword, or sword, that doesn't really
Mm,
do anything for me.
yeah,
But if it's, do you want to go from one handed sword to giant glaive to
right,
butcher's axe? Those are
right.
three legitimately different ways.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like just having sword compared to giant glaive or glowing sword, I think it just makes it way more meaningful
Mhm.
in the gameplay, experience, right? I mean, I think that, like me personally, if I'm just throwing a bunch of swords and then I have to stand there in the inventory and be like, okay, this one's +3 fire,
Mhm.
oh, this one's -4 agility, but 5 fire. I don't, you know what I mean? I would
Mhm.
rather just be like, oh, let me get this new sword with a new weapon set.
Mhm.
With a new move set, I think is more where I would like.
Yeah, and to Bebop, thank you. Yeah, the cleaver weapon was the other one in
Cleaver,
Bloodborne.
thank you. Saw Cleaver, yes.
Yeah, and
I
what you were
never did
just,
a Cleaver run through, I don't think. No, I didn't.
I think I
Yeah.
did. The weapons I like in Bloodborne was again like the cane whip and that like hammer that you can like lay it up by like hitting someone on
Oh
your back.
yes. I think I used the original axe. I love that one the most. Actually, is the one I used.
Hmm.
That one was good.
And to your what you were just saying there about having like different skills attached to the weapons, that was one of the unusual trends that I wanted to see more action RPGs do. There's only two that I can think of that went that route. One was Victor Vran, and the other one was Warhammer Inquisitor Marta, and I think I got that name right. Where in those games, your actual skills are tied to the weapon. So if I decide to choose a shotgun, the
Yeah.
shotgun gets 6 unique skills. If I say, you know what, I want to try Tonfas, well, the Tonfas have 6 original skills. So it was that case of you're able to really differentiate between the weapons. It's not just
What game is this?
Victor Vran,
Victor.
VRAN. It was
Okay.
funny enough made by a developer who makes City Builders, and was their
Oh
one
wow.
and
I
only
love that.
one action RPG, and I love that game. Kingdom of are you talking about? Let me see if I get the name right because I think I do own this game. Uh, Kingdom of Amalur.
Was
Because
that the one you told me to play, Todd?
I own that
Amalur.
game and I have not played it at all.
Yeah, no, I haven't played it. Oh, I do have it. But I haven't played it yet either.
Yeah.
Todd, was that the one that you were saying had really good combat in it? Yeah, like like you were saying, like in Skyrim. I mean, like it was almost like when we were talking about games a few episodes back about
Mhm.
forcing combat into the game. That felt like one of the games where like someone was like, okay, we have to have combat in here because the combat was terrible in that game. Just to mention that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was that game, Todd. All right,
Yeah.
thank you.
But again, I will shout to the rooftop for everyone to try Victor Vran at least one time if you like action RPGs.
You
And
want
like,
to type that name in the chat so others can see that?
sure. And apparently they got the voice actor for The Witcher to play Victor Vran, so you can cosplay as Geralt, cosplaying as Victor Vran in that game.
Excellent. That's very meta.
And what was and again, like one of the other games that I tried here, I'm really going to really confuse people. Who here has played? And let me make sure I get the name right. The Incredible Adventures of Van Helsing.
Not me.
That was an action RPG. There's 3 different ones, and then they combined all 3, kind of like Sonic and Knuckles style, into
Wow.
one mega game. And it's one of those titles I've tried to play this like several times, and it just felt like all the choices were so like watered down. Like even though you had all these different classes and all these different ways of playing, it still just felt like I'm just evolving into stand and left click. Just keep mashing the left click attack. And again, there has to be an interesting aspect to the actual gameplay. And I've said this in the book, I know I mentioned this in several other places. I think it's why I was drawn so much to dungeon crawlers. Stuff like Etrian Odyssey, Legends of Grimrock. I still have to play more of the wizardry games, but what was it? Not Labyrinth of Labyrinth of Refrain. Let me get the actual name of it. Labyrinth of Galleria, Labyrinth of Refrain, like those kinds of games where you have to decide who's in your party, and that effectively affects what you can do in combat. If I don't have a mage, guess what? I'm not
Very
throwing
cool.
fireballs. But
Very
let's say I
cool.
have that character who, enchants their fists with fire, and they can punch with flames. Well, I have fire damage as a different kind of it. So again, it's about this idea that there has to be interesting choices, and they have to affect the gameplay. Again,
Yes.
just telling me, do I want to use a 6-star character or a 5-star character?
Does not make an RPG.
No.
Right. Yeah, so I think that that would be the key thing is the choices that you make affect the game in some form or fashion, right?
Hmm. So we are just over an hour in, and I think I have like one, maybe two big questions left. But before we get to them, anything from your notes that you want to bring up
Let me look at my
for
notes
RPGs?
here. Hold on, I did have some notes.
Let's see if there's anything else here. And while you're looking that up, I was just thinking about some of the other, like, I guess, quote unquote, modern-ish CRPGs I tried to play. Because I did try to play Dragon's Age back in the day. I tried to play Mass Effect. And those games just didn't really work for me. I think, again, part
Would you
of it.
consider Torchlight 2? Torchlight, kinda.
I do like them. They feel more like.
They're just like Diablos.
Yeah, they feel like the more like casual or the more easier to learn version of Diablo, which there is nothing wrong with that. I've heard that apparently Torchlight 3 came out, I think, last year, and I completely, that would completely block my memory of that game, and apparently it did horribly as well.
Oh, okay. Here we go. Since you're writing the book, I had this question for you. What do you think sets apart a mediocre RPG from an outstanding one? Like, what key aspects?
I had a feeling that was going to come up because I was thinking about that last night as well. That it is very hard to describe to someone what makes a good and a bad RPG.
Right.
Because the simple answer would be, well, just copy Final Fantasy, just copy Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, or whatever.
Before you forget, like I think before I break your train of thought, like of all genres, this would be probably the hardest one to get all the elements correct. Like compared to a platformer, right? Or a platformer, there's all your elements. But it's like for an RPG, it's this massive buffet of things because it's expanded to everything. And what exactly elements will work together to make it good, right? That is very difficult. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
And I think what I've settled on, because I had to actually dedicate a section to this point about there are no rules to what makes an RPG anymore.
Yeah.
Because again, if you're like, if I say to someone, if I put a gun to someone's head and say, tell me the exact mechanics in an RPG, 10 different people are going to have 10 very different answers for that.
Yes.
And what I settled on was that an RPG, from a mechanics standpoint, is about you picking what systems you want to include. Do I want to include, again, equipment crafting? Do I want this to be a timeline-based system? Stuff like, what's the name of that game? I can't remember the name of the series. Was it Xenosaga? The one that had, way back in the day, that had a timeline that you can manipulate.
I think that was not Chrono Trigger.
No, it wasn't Chrono Trigger. The game that I played a few years ago, was it Space? Honest, I've played way too many video games. The one that was like a tactical RPG that had full timeline manipulation as well, from the developers of Halcyon 6. Like, once you have to decide what systems, what aspects of an RPG you want to have, and then we can have that discussion of what makes a good, bad, or average version of that. What is a good crafting system? Something that, allows someone to make a variety of weapons and really specialize. What would be a bad crafting system? Something that is, I would say, very unwieldy, or it's just simply stats. If your whole crafting is going from sword +1, sword +2, sword +3, and we just go up into infinity, that would be a very dull version of that.
So what do you think would be a better version of crafting that would be more engaging?
I would say something that allows you to make like different choices for your weapons. Like, let's say, I would say maybe something like along the lines of how like the class evolutions in Fire Emblem worked. That you start with a soldier, and then you could turn that soldier into a knight. You could turn it into a paladin. You could turn it into a sellsword. And each one of those has a very different way of playing. So let's say you could turn your sword into, I don't know, a scimitar. Maybe you can turn it into a cutlass. Maybe it goes
Yeah.
into again like a long sword. I'm really just grasping at
No, but
swords here.
that's great though. But that's a meaningful choice, right? That's a way more meaningful choice. If I crafted it and I got set or a different new special ability or new passives or something that that's completely different, like the other game you were talking about where which your party would just dictate what you'd have, right? And that's definitely way more meaningful than just adding +5 +2.
Yeah. And again, I think it's about having fewer choices that matter versus saying here's 87 different spells and only maybe 7 of them are actually going to be affecting the game. And like we saw this with kind of the deck building RPG. Like how many deck building RPGs these days, your deck is influenced by your gear. If I'm wearing a soldier vest, I'll get access to these specific cards. If I'm wearing a scout vest, I get these cards. So there's a direct relationship between what I'm choosing and how it's impacting the moment-to-moment gameplay. And I think that, again, is where you really need to focus in terms of an RPG.
Definitely.
So, any other notes from you?
No, I think that's it. I'm good there. So let's go to your.
Okay.
Oh.
So I have 2 more, I think, point/topics, and then my voice will die on me.
Okay.
So let's start with the quote-unquote simpler one. What do you think about RPG Maker? And I'm going to throw this to the chat as well. Like, RPG Maker, as we said, at this point, is a long-standing software tool or editing software. They're releasing, I think, yet another iteration of it. Let's see, there's a date. RPG Maker, is MZ the new one? No, that was 2020. I know they're working on a new one, which I'm not seeing when it's going to come out. But there are people, again, that they will immediately downvote anything that's an RPG Maker game, even if it looks like it could be an RPG Maker game.
Right.
So, what do you think is kind of like RPG Maker's place in the RPG market today?
Well, I'm not sure sales wise where it goes, but my opinion, RPG Maker has definitely improved. I used to be, if I even saw anything that looked like it was RPG Maker, or if I knew it was RPG Maker, in my head I would say, okay, this developer did not go all the way. They took the cheaper, not the cheaper route, but the more of a shortcut route. Instead of really looking into game design, they're focusing on this on the simpler stuff. But in reality, it allows them to focus more on what actually really matters. What we've talked about before is actually making a game or making a story. And the thing about an RPG, right, is narrative. Choices that matter. So it really allows the developers to focus more on that. And so I've really grown to appreciating those type of games because I've seen some really unique and interesting games. Because if you have the developer again focusing on the narrative instead of how is the save system going to work? How is just all the gameplay framework, which we're definitely going to have a one about the everything that's involved in that. But all of the things, saving, the music systems, all of that is already done for you, and you can focus on the creative aspects. So for me personally, I think they're a great way for a developer to even develop all their games. And if they developed all their games, I don't think there's even a reason to advance from Game Maker if you're doing a good enough narrative, if going outside of the box with it. I think that also the stigma has dropped a little bit more and that people accept it. Game Makers RPGs a little bit more. It seems like it's dropped. I don't know if it seems like that to you. But to me personally, I think that RPG Maker games are really great, and they offer a lot more creative potential in the RPG space. Just because you don't have to focus on, like we said, building the frame of the car or the engine and stuff like that. All that's built for you. Instead, you're focusing on what color are we going to do, what is it going to smell like, things like that. So definitely my opinion on them.
Mm-hmm.
I believe a 3D one. I haven't kept full check on it, but I think they're even going to be releasing a 3D one soon, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, what's your opinion on it, Josh? Now, are you overwhelmed with them? Tired of?
I think
I
have.
sometimes feel like when I see playing a Game Maker game,
Oh, you kind of cut out
someone-
there again.
I wonder if when you play another Game Maker, it's going to be the exact same. Or how do you feel about them?
Yeah, and I think I have softened up on them to some point. Again, like if you're just making, RPG Maker, Final Fantasy, or Dragon Quest, like I don't have the interest in playing those.
No.
But like if you're going to do something that's different, like say a Fear and Hunger or Unforeseen Consequences was another one that I liked. Those are the ones that interest me. Or even Jimmy and the Pulsating Mass, I think, was made in RPG Maker. That if you're going to really push like what you're getting out, I think that's a really good thing. And to Ikari's comment, yeah, that's what I hear a lot. That it's sold so much piecemeal or a la carte that it does get very frustrating in that respect. But I guess
didn't know about that aspect.
So here's the question I want to throw to you, and I want to throw to chat. The most common criticism that we hear from like professional developers or people in the industry is that you're wasting your time learning or building a game in RPG Maker versus, say, spending a few days a week or a few hours, every so often learning Unity or Game Maker or Godot. What do you think about that as a criticism?
Yeah, like 100%. I would say, okay, so I wouldn't spend. Of course, you're going to want to consider your capabilities. If you're just like, I'm not going to learn how to program. There's no way. I just want to just make a storytelling. I just want to tell the story and that's it. Yes, but Game Maker is not the best option to learn how games work. The gameplay framework, like everything that's involved, the game modes, character controllers, the HUD, the UI, all of that, they're all separate classes and functions and things. And with Game Maker, you're not learning how any of that interacts or how any of that works. So you really are cutting yourself short severely by making a game in Game. That is definitely one of the downfalls, and one of the main reasons I never touched was because of course I was programming when I was like 7, so Game Maker wasn't in there, but definitely if you are looking to pursue like making a game as a career and continue, you're definitely like your time in Game Maker being wasted. You're not learning very much about the game creation process at all. Some minimal stuff you might learn, like some stuff about like sprite animation, or maybe what else is there? You might learn just some very simple stuff, but a lot of it is only applied to it only works in Game Maker, right? Mm-hmm. If you were to learn, for example, in Unity or Dot or in Unreal, all of those skills will translate to each other. If I learned in Unreal first, everything I learned in Unreal translated over to everything I learned in Unity translated over to Unreal. anything I learn in Game Maker, almost zero will translate over to any other game development, right? I would say the only thing that you are gaining would be the process of releasing the game, right? The process of actually making it, marketing, selling it. But as far as developing your skills as a game developer, I would probably not recommend Game Maker.
All right. And Josh Mayer, thank you so much for the super chat. I really appreciate it. Josh is old Josh. There's a Josh tax for watching, only for Josh's for the stream.
Thank you, Josh.
And I agree with your point there. Like, if you want to be like professional game developer, like if you want to go and work at a major studio, work at a major company, RPG Maker is not going to be like the feather on your cap from a resume or portfolio standpoint. But if you don't care about that, as you said, like, if you don't care about the nuts and bolts, if you're just like, I have a very interesting story to tell, let me use RPG Maker as my canvas, then I say, go nuts on that. Just like how, there's that free software for the adventure, I think it's Adventure Game Studio. I think that's freeware. I know there's one for like visual novels and that kind of thing. So if you're just interested in kind of the creative aspect of it, not so much, again, like if you're trying to build like your own 100% original game, like I would not recommend using an RPG Maker.
Right.
But again, if you're treating it more like a canvas for your own take on or your own story, again, stuff like Fear and Hunger, Unforeseen Consequence, I know there's a few other ones as well. Now I think it's perfectly reasonable to use that. And again, I think it's that challenge of proving to people that you have something different. That it's not just, if I play your RPG Maker game, that I'm going to get Final Fantasy 1 version 865. Just like how, again, like the platformer genre had that period where people were like, I don't want to play 27 Mario games. I don't want to play 57 Sonic clones. I want to play a different take on that. I want to see what you can do, again, like Freedom Planet. That Freedom Planet started as a fan-made, Sonic game, and then they just went and did their own unique thing, but you can still see the DNA of Sonic. And no one's saying you can't include the DNA of Final Fantasy or the DNA of Baldur's Gate. But we want to see what you can do beyond that.
I'm not sure if I quite understand that question, Josh.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. Are you saying, like, is that good advice to focus on them, or... Like, I would say, like, what Arva is saying, that the tools that you want to use... And again, it's important to understand just what is the scope of your game. If you want to create, Skyrim as an indie developer, RPG Maker is not going to be the tool set for you. But if you want to create, let's say, your own take off of Breath of Wild, or not Breath of Wild, Breath of Fire from back in the SNES era, you could use that. Oh, I just remembered the other game that I played that I believe was RPG Maker, and I lost it. There was like a Lovecraftian... I think it's on my wish list. Let's see if I can find it really fast.
Yeah, but it's just about like Arva said, using the tool. If RPG Maker is enough for you, then it's. But just be aware of like how far you want to go and what the scope of your game is, right? Because again, like if you're wanting to make, I don't know, a Final Fantasy 12, for example, you're gonna need to use something like Unreal. If you wanted to make something like Don't Starve, probably just start with like Unity or something like that. It really depends on what you're with. But again, like it's really about the activity of your career and how much you're invested into it. But definitely don't think that Game Maker is my best way or the best way into game development. It is just one way into game development. But it doesn't. But again, it kind of stunts you to just Game Maker, and again, also the issue with the piecemealings. Don't forget that. Yeah, because like Unity and Unreal, that's it. You get it. There's no piecemealing, and of course, they're free. Also Godot. So, I think does Game Maker charge? I'm not sure.
I believe it's free to download. I think they have different editions of it.
Yeah,
but I'm not. Don't want to quote me on that one. And the game that I found, it was Frail Hearts on Steam. Like, that one, I believe, is another RPG Maker game. But again, when you look at screenshots of it and stuff like Fear and Hunger, it does not look like a Final Fantasy game. It doesn't look like a Dragon Quest or even anything else out there. And again, it's about, as you said and as Laura said, it's about what is your goal? What are you trying to use these tools for? And I mentioned this in my video, my presentation about YouTube. Like, if you're going to do video and audio editing work, if all you want to do is just make sure each clip is next to each other, you don't need to learn Adobe Premiere. You don't need to give Adobe money for that. Right. But if you want to, expand, if you want something that's the most powerful, that's the option. But again, the most powerful doesn't necessarily work for everyone. If you're not good at art, getting Adobe After Effects is not going to transform you into the ultimate, artist. But you should use what you're trying to, or use the tools that you need, versus, again, trying to build the ultimate perfect game. Let me see, I can't.
There's a couple there.
Big games of the pod. Ooh, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. I know which one you're talking about. Don't remember what engine they use. I don't want to say they use
the beat 'em up one.
Yeah. Let's see.
Seems Unity. Ask.
I was going to say if it was Unity or not. And not seeing systems who developed it. It was done by Ubisoft. Could have been Unity. I'm not completely sure on that. But like, Unity is another good example of this. Like, there is a vast difference in quality in Unity games. There are some Unity games that look very, very bad. Just as there are some Unity games that look like Hollow Knight, that look like Ori. And there's, again, countless other examples of this. It really is, again, about what you're trying to get out of the engine and what is your goal of game development. And again, every game is different, just like every single RPG is different. If you want to make an RPG that, instead of turn-based combat, why don't we have dodging shmup bullets? That could never work until Undertale kind of became this massive phenomenon.
Just a fun fact, Genshin Impact is made in Unity. So, you can go far with an engine.
Yep. Oh yes, I love that era too. Like, again, like
the best.
We gotta be careful. We're almost at 90 minutes. We can go for another
2 hours.
Yeah, this will turn into like the podcast version of my book. That's like a 75-hour podcast.
I actually don't think we've even scratched the surface, Josh.
Yeah. So I guess here's my final question. Again, there's nothing stopping us from coming back to this as a topic.
Yeah, definitely.
So my final question, this is something that I kind of struggle with in the book, and we've been kind of talking about it here and there throughout this discussion. Do you think the qualifiers of CRPG and JRPG are still relevant? Do you think they need to go? Like, where do you think those terms are still applicable to games?
Yeah, I think currently they still are. I think because there's definitely a differentiation between a CRPG and a JRPG. Um, I mean, you really could just boil it all down to just RPGs now at this point. But I think there's still for a few more years. I think there's still necessary. What do you think, Josh? Because you said you've been going back and forth. Why is that?
I think the reason why is I was watching one of the Jimquisition videos, and they were talking about how a lot of Japanese developers felt like the term JRPG was a little derogatory towards them.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, everyone remembers the Phil Fish incident back in, was that 2010, 2011? That there's people who view JRPG as a negative. That, it's like, you're insulting the game for it. But the problem is that we really don't have we don't have any other really good qualifiers for it. And I think we do need to, I think what they define as either a very story-driven or very, experience-driven game versus a very mechanical-driven, very systems-driven game, I think those hold up. But I do wonder if we need to have a better term for that, or a better qualifier in that respect.
Adobe Flash controller?
Really?
Oh, that sounds terrible. Oh. I would not want to be making that in Adobe Flash, but I could see it being made in Adobe Flash.
So, oh, don't quote me.
Okay.
So, again, it's that question of, is there a better way to define? Because, again, as we said, everything these days is an RPG. There are JRPG style games that are very story and experience driven. There are CRPGs these days that are very mechanic driven. Do we need a better qualifier in that respect?
I think so. As far as what qualifier, I'm not sure, Josh.
Yeah, I said in my book that I am not going to sit here and tell you what is and what is not an RPG. I am not opening myself up to that explosion.
Right.
YouTuber insults all Japan. I can see the headline right now.
I mean, I've never really seen it as a. To me, audio dropped again.
Yeah.
This is a new mic, so it should be like a super expensive mic.
I wonder if it's like some kind of lag or internet issue. I'm not sure.
Probably, yeah. I've been having the internet all day. Now I forgot what I was saying, but
about the JRPG not being viewed as a negative.
Right. So to me, I believe that JRPGs just meant that it included more of the tropes or trappings of a JRPG, such just it was more hardcore, right? And they didn't follow the same rules of D&D. Basically, is the simple way I saw it. And there would be more complexity compared to a CRPG. Well, actually, CRPGs can be pretty difficult, but I never did see it derogatory. You've heard it as derogatory,
That's what I think. People still go back to that Phil Fish blowout and what some Japanese developers view as. They're treating it as, the lesser, as, compared to, the professional CRPGs. And, for me, I always saw it as just, again, console versus PC, just where that game came from. But again, with how much the genre has expanded out, that doesn't really hold true anymore. Do we call Call of Duty an ARPG now?
No, it is definitely not. Definitely not. It's only a shoot with and like I was saying, they're just basically almost mechanics now. Almost not even a genre because it's been so watered down. But I definitely wouldn't call it an RPG.
I think we need to call it a visual novel.
Yeah, we'll call it a visual novel for sure. One of the better ones.
So I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Talk about the differences. We talked about. Oh, I guess this is again final point for me. Where, like you mentioned this earlier, so I want to throw it back to you. Where do you think? Do you think there's any like future trends or like
Yeah,
where do you see
yeah.
an RPG evolving in let's say 5 years?
So I think there's going to be. I think this is RPGs mainly due to the age that are out right now. Like, so there's going to be a lot more ways to create branching narratives, different situations that work within the context, right? I believe like the tools are really almost aimed to help RPGs the most. So I feel like, there's random dialogue every time you talk to a player that will be AI generated, but it'll be contextual to that type of personality. I think that the stories will be able to adapt and change more due to algorithms used and things like learning modules and things like that. So I see AI. I'm sorry. I see RPGs becoming way more dynamic in the future in that way. That's basically where I see it, and I see it happening sooner than later.
Hmm.
What about you, Josh? What do you think they're going?
I think I didn't think about things from like the AI driven, like in terms of like choices and narrative. Like for me, I think a real interesting trend to look at is where mobile games are going to go in the next 5 years. Because a lot of what we could see as like the trends of the RPG genre today really stem from the rise of the mobile and live service space over the last like 5 to 7 years. I do think they're going to become more streamlined. I think we're moving away from the era of the very number crunchy
Yeah,
RPGs selling well.
yeah,
Like if you're going to try and do that, you need to make it streamlined. You need to make it parsable. Like I'm curious how the Disgaea games are doing these days. Because again, like the first Disgaea
yeah.
came out in 2002, I want to say, here in the United
Isn't
States.
there a new one coming out
Yes, I think we're up to
at 7,000?
seven,
Yeah,
something like that. And I don't know how well it's going. I know they've just announced that the end of service is happening for the mobile Disgaea game. People have just did not respond well to that. I don't think the developer had put up enough content for it.
yeah,
So I think we're hitting that point, much like with other genres, that the RPG scene has really become, again, like much like with other places, like a very much a peak and valley kind of situation. Where again, like games like Arknights, like Genshin Impact, Azure Lane, like they're not going to die. Like they are embedded at this point in terms
yeah,
of their fan base and their design. But if you're trying to do something similar in that space, you're really kind of starting in with a huge disadvantage.
yeah. Remember, just because that market is so huge, that might be all that there is for that market. That's it.
Or it's
Just
just a market for that one
that
game.
one exactly.
To Akari's comment, I think RPG design itself is never going to go away. Again, it has expanded out to almost all corners of the industry.
Right.
If we're talking like traditional, again, someone who is trying to make Baldur's Gate 1, who's trying to make Dragon Quest, I think that has become stagnant. And as an interesting point, like I remember like from like 1998 to maybe 2002, 2003, I just stopped caring about RPGs. I got completely tired of the formula. I could not stand Final Fantasy anymore. The Baldur's Gate, the Neverwinter Nights. No way in hell I was playing those.
Oh my gosh.
And the game that brought me back was basically a combination of playing Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne and then Etrian Odyssey. Like, those were the two games that got me back interested, because those two were very mechanically driven. Like, it was interesting to fight each battle. But I've said this many times on stream. I cannot do random encounters anymore. I do not want to walk from point A to point B and have 8 to 15 battles that just pop up without me controlling it.
I'm almost going to break out in a sweat thinking about that.
There's a JRPG PTSD for you.
Right.
And again, there are people who still love that. There are fans of every single RPG Maker game. But again, if you're trying to appeal, as you were saying earlier, in terms of growing the market, there are people who have never touched a Final Fantasy. There are people who have never played Pokemon, possibly.
Yeah.
How do you reach them? And the answer is you need to look at different ways. Just like how you see how the deck building genre has evolved. How Darkest Dungeon. There are people who are trying to make their own takes on that. But again, just copying that one-to-one is not going to work.
Never works. Never works. You have to extract what works, like distill the formula down, change it, and make something unique. A copy. I mean, like, and even this is kind of like getting into sequelitis, whatever. But like, would someone want to see like I don't know, Saturday Night Fever? But exactly the same, like, you know what I mean? I don't think people would want to see it. Like, it's the same thing over again, but probably worse because it's not the original, right? So,
did people really enjoy Airplane 2 over Airplane 1?
Exactly.
There's a discussion for another few hours right there.
That's our next Saturday, 4 hours of Airplane 1.
And again, like, going back to the point that I said earlier, like, it does not make sense for you to play and study every single RPG. No. It's not relevant anymore to say that, oh, I played Final Fantasy VI and Knights of the Old Republic. I know how to make the best RPG.
Right.
It doesn't work. And I think, again, to summarize my point about this, good RPG design is about figuring out what systems you want to include in your game, and then making it your own. If you want to make an RPG that, let's say, you can escape from every battle, do it. Like, having an escape system that works 100% of the time, that's not going to determine whether or not your game gets a 9 or a 5 out of 10. If you want to make an RPG where all combat is chess pieces, that instead of, fighting a battle, we do chess, go for it. But you need to make sure that once you decide on those systems, that they are the best possible versions of it. Because if you make an RPG that, let's say, has amazing equipment diversity, but all the combat is horrible, all that work you did focusing on the equipment, it's not going to matter. Because people aren't going to play that. And it's why there's so much churn in a lot of RPGs. Because if just one single system sticks out badly, it all goes down. And I said this in my video when I was talking about assist modes. Like, this is not me just throwing shade at these games. We can look at the churn rates. Where a game like Ikenfell, that a lot of people who play through that, I really love the story, it still lost, I think, 50 to 60% of its player base within an hour. Like, so many people... They checked out, like, pretty much like the very first fight. They just said, nope, I'm out. And again, it's why you need to be very mindful about how you are presenting your systems and what systems you're featuring in your game. Oh yeah, there's a reason why my chapter on balancing and advanced RPG design is like its own book. One. Yeah, it's a book within the book, basically.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many disparate and different systems that you need to combine and they need to work. You have to choose the right systems, and it all has to make sense.
How it's balanced with everything else in your game.
With everything else in the game, yeah, it's a gargantuan task.
I can feel the PTSD of writing this chapter is swelling back up in me as we're talking about this.
Sorry, Josh. I was actually... PTSD about thinking about building it. I was like, oh no.
Mhm. There we go. We gotta add another 5 more hours to this cast. Let's start over again. Let's
restart.
Let's just restart. New game +1 for the podcast, and just keep going until we get to new game plus like 7.
7. There we go. Right? How many does Dark Souls have? 7.
I think it just keeps going. Oh yeah, we talk about balancing and skills. That will be here for sometime till next week for sure. But again, like for my final point, build the RPG that you want to make, and then start looking at how do these systems work. What is a good, bad, and average version of it? If you're trying to build, let's say, an RPG like Undertale, playing Final Fantasy VI, playing Baldur's Gate, or Divinity is not going to help you in the slightest. But yeah, I think so, Atari.
They did.
Once we start getting more poison swamps, then we know for sure.
Blighttown everywhere.
Khalid everywhere. Every state gets a Khalid. But to wrap up my point before I forget, again, whatever kind of RPG you want to build, look for versions of those specific systems. Figure out what you like about them, what you don't like about them. And that's how you can start building your own design. Because we can't have a discussion on, is my RPG good or bad, until you can just figure out what are the systems of my RPG. There's, again, if I'm building a dungeon crawling party-based RPG, that is fundamentally different than building a CRPG where I'm just playing as one character. And it's, like a turn-based style thing. And again, we didn't even talk about the difference between real-time and turn-based RPGs.
Oh boy, yeah, I know. We barely got in. We've honestly barely scratched the surface on this topic, and that's how far-reaching RPGs are.
And why my book grew like 5 times bigger than what I originally intended.
Don't worry, Josh. Yours will be shorter.
Mm-hmm. When we just break into like 7 different books. Like I said to the publisher, we could probably just do like smaller books for each one of the subgenres.
It's going to be a live service book.
Yep, there we go. Every week, Josh adds another chapter to the book until he finally goes insane from the book. How many chapters will Josh get to before he just jumps out the window?
I'm sure you got a lot in you, man.
But that is my final point. I can feel my voice starting to die on me, so I will throw over to you to end things on.
Man, I think we basically covered everything. I think if I get any more, then we're just gonna keep going on. So, I'm just gonna end with. I'm kind of looking forward to the future of RPGs. I feel like with all the AI tools that are available and the development tools, that we're going to get some really, like, it's almost going to be at a point like how Game Maker allows people to make RPGs. We're going to be at a point very soon where all games are going to be Game Makerable due to the tools that are available, right? So I'm looking forward to that very, for stories that learn and the world can change. A lot of context-driven NPCs with unique dialogue, those type of things. So that's what I'm looking for. Other than that, I think we've covered everything.
Mm-hmm. You're waiting for when Unreal will add the make RPG button to the.
I've been waiting for like 5 years in it. They say it's coming, but that's just.
Mm-hmm. When we do the round table, talking more about AI, we'll have to ask everyone, like, will the engines get to the point we just hit, okay, RPG, fishing, racing, compile the game, We'll do it all for you.
That would be great. That would be great.
I just gave so many indie developers a heart attack with saying that.
Why am I doing all this work for? I just press.
All right, but I think that is going to do it for this chat. And again, like we barely even just like cover like I think 10% of RPG design. So
off-road fishing game.
Yep. But if you have a suggestion for a future show, again, doesn't have to be RPG related or anything that is design or game dev related, let us know in the comments down below. Do the liking, subscribing, bell ring, and all that great stuff.
Yes, my links are down below. Liking, subscribing, join the Discord. Have some new topics, something you want to discuss, and that's it. And I look forward to seeing you next time, everyone.
Yep, we will be back next Saturday around 5 p.m. ET for the show. Again, be sure to visit our Discord and Patreon. If you're interested in my never-ending book on the never-ending story on RPG design, be sure to check out Game Design Deep Dive Role-Playing Games when it is released, I don't know, some point, because I still have to do all the image sourcing.
And remember, because it's an RPG book, you do have to hoard, so you have to purchase multiple copies.
Yep. If you put the book down, it disintegrates, so you have to have multiple.
Right.
There's a durability rate on the book.
Exactly, and the only way to repair it is buying another book. So,
unless you get lucky and get the 6-star version of the book that has 2 more hours of durability.
Right. plus 1% durability.
There we go. I should send these ideas to the publisher. They'll love these ideas. All right, everybody. That is going to do it. So we will be back next week. I believe our topic may be shooters, but we may find something else along the way. But
if anything pops up.
Well, with all that said, have a great rest of your weekend, and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where it's the art and science of games. And until next time, take care.